For the benefit of those of you who have been following these proceedings, keeping up for a while, knowing how things work, there is every chance that after I'm gone, some of you may want to keep some sort of public activity along these lines going. So to help assist therein, from the grave, as it were, what I'm going to do, I've decided I am going to die under controversial, if not bizarre, circumstances. And now the news. On one world was a race of creatures who, after they learned to walk, were each issued a motorized method of transportation that made additional areas of their possible development more accessible. Most of them were satisfied with the arrangement and lived out their days still partially dependent on the after-physical market means of locomotion. Legend, however, has it that a few would now and then come along who would eventually begin to chafe at the situation. For what reason? Who knows? A father interrupted his son's still reverie in the backyard with the comment, "Listening to bird calls is no fit pastime if you begin to chirp." Magnetism holds the physical universe together, obviously, as does it the non-so aspects, not so obviously. A motorist once mused, "We're all stuck in traffic, though I'm not sure it's required to be stuck to it." Thus, to use the word in its absolutely loosest sense, thus it is that the attempt to make oneself more consistently conscious and alert is both the simplest, plainest thing a man can do, while also being the positively most difficult, complex, and damn near impossible undertaking ever dreamt of by man. Using the word by, as in dreamt of by man, which leaves one with an entirely, ever dreamt of by man, using the word by, as in dreamt of by man, in an extremely charitable, if not downright misleading, fashion, which leaves one with an entirely new area of unnoted inquiry, untouched inquiry. All right. When you blow it, how you going to hide it? Thus, to use the word, fuck it. Myth says that after life originally blinded man so as to make him endlessly seek, as recompense it placed out before him a gigantic secret, so immense as to be impossible not to stumble over. Although, so immense as to be almost impossible not to stumble over, although most still manage not to do so. Fable update and exposition. Some nearsighted elephants were once given an intellectual in a bag and asked to determine the identity of the creature within. If you don't think about where you might go, you can't go anywhere. And if you can't think about where you might go, you won't want to go anywhere. In the physical world, it's obvious that fair is fair, but in the mental one, not quite so apparent, especially to the mind, which is the only thing it can be apparent to, which just again shows the prevalence of fairness. A boy who believed his father to have spent a lifetime involved with the mystical struggle one day asked him, "Was it more fun when you were young or more fun now?" And the old man thought, "What a dirty question," and was proud of the lad. Tonight's cheer-up hint. Once you've gone approximately 63 months past the point where you finally gave up actually looking for the secret anywhere, the possibility then arises of you seeing something. A mother once so cautioned a daughter, "Being blind is nothing to be ashamed of. Being proud of it is." There was once a race of men on a long journey who became lost. And to compensate, them being a race of thinking creatures, they began to pretend that they were not. Which took care of that. An uncle once poked a nephew in the side and said, "Amongst all the perceived shortcomings of man is a talent for which he is never given head-on unconditional credit. The ability to think his way out of anything he ever thought his way into." Well, it's usually thought of that mystics speak in metaphors while everyone else speaks literally. Don't be too sure, but what again, people's got things backwards. Some people believe that they are their own worst enemy. And some people believe that they are their own best friend. But only a few people know what they really are. A man with an opinion of himself has a flawed one. Flawed as in useless at best, and detrimental in the case of those on the move. There was once a mystical order, the sign of acceptance thereunto being that your lips were sewn shut. A father told his son, "Learning to talk is not the disgrace. The continuation thereof past a certain point in your life is." And the lad was glad he had such a dad as a friend till he could become his own. Same as an alert man appreciates the mind for what it can do until he reaches the land of transverbal awareness. History does not repeat itself. It goes nowhere to begin with. The barbaric hordes do not periodically return to threaten civilization. They are constantly within man, but denied, renamed, perceived as external, and if none of this works, simply ignored as long as possible. The mind tends to see the foundations of man's progress in terms of things, physical and external, rather than as being symbolism for his internal intellectual journey. To the more alert, the hordes are always at the door, the mind being the door and thoughts the you-know-whats. No real man's inner downfall is ever due to surprise attack by unfamiliar forces. Reflection and the perception of wisdom. Those who look back on their life attempt a survey of a time that never was, an experience in which they played no part. Real change does not require repentance. A certain man sought out a mystical school and said to the registrar, "I am considering enrolling in your institution, but first I have a question. If I do so, may I, at least for my freshman year, retain the privilege of being, whenever I find the need arising, either angry or frightened? And oh yeah, do I get a discount if I pay my tuition in cash?" And the official, with a wave of his hand, replied, "Oh my, forget about the tuition. We have full scholarships for those as stupid as you." And the would-be matriculant was forced to break off the interview and walk outside as he pondered the several possible significances of the offer. And of your rights. How come in real life things like that never happen? If someone were told that they qualified for a scholarship simply on the basis of how dumb they were, they'd be immediately infuriated. They would never go off and think about it in an attempt to learn something from it. You know damn well that people never do this, so why do you keep making up stories wherein they do? And of course he misses the point. That is why I make them up. In all eras and areas of this planet are stories of original man having offended the gods or forces of creation, and his punishment being driven from paradise and cut off from the center. But if for no other reason than the commonness of the tales, why is this scenario never seen as a predictable playing out of things in the natural order of man's evolution into a thinking creature? The stability of certain secured areas is actually dependent upon gaps in the data generally believed to be necessary for its maintenance. Information that surveillance cameras can never provide is that regarding themselves. And again I ask, why is this always viewed as an anomaly of the function rather than pondered on the basis of what it is, the native state of the function? It is assumed by most that there are two types of questions, rhetorical ones and real ones, while the more alert know that there is but one. That all inquiries, are they to lead anywhere, are always rhetorical, in that they in fact possess the very information for which they apparently seek. A guy told his brother's son, the way you can tell that you're talking to someone who's more conscious is by the fact that they always let you win any argument and have the last word. And the kid replied, but I've seen people do that who obviously weren't more conscious. And the guy replied, maybe, but where ordinary people pull this, they always make sure that the ones that are pulling it on realize it. And the lad himself suddenly realized that they were not discussing conversations between people, but the kind that goes on unnoted inside one's own head. There is a myth regarding an ancient, long-forgotten mystical order whose approach was based on grammar, and whose inner secret teaching consisted of just one idea, that being, there is but one punctuation and one only, the period. Period. Now get out of here. End of secret teaching. Well, according to the info I have here available. The simple believe that given the chance, they can physically defeat their opponents, while the more sophisticated believe that with like opportunity, they can intellectually overcome their enemies. It remains still none but the mythical warriors who correctly comprehend the nature of the wide and deep potential inner combat that is human existence at its best, yet least personal. A man with a mirror never wants for a foe, and a man who takes life personally never fully feels life to be his ally. The singular weapon issued man, the mind, is in one way unique in that its offensive capabilities are such that against them it has no adequate defense. Out of the way, disregard all that, the cry of the triumphant warrior. One tale tells of a certain mystic who, life, for some reason or the other, decided to grant a favor and so said to the transcendentally inclined one, your choice, two possible favors. One is that I now, right now at your present age in the game, give to you more additional knowledge than you even imagine is still to be had. Or the second, I will move you back in time so that you're again at the beginning of your wondrous trek, a young man full of energy and excitement, but will make you twice as stupid as you were the first time around. What'll it be? What'll it be? Asked life. And for a long time the man did not respond, him being deeply involved in pondering the obviously wide deviation between what life considers a favor and what men normally do. There was once a man who heard this story and was immediately pushed several years forward in his journey. A student of all things human once asked himself, why are there legends of maps to lost mines, tales of maps to lost cities, even myths of maps leading to the core of creation, Yet no believable rumors of maps that direct one to lands beyond the grasp of maps. The insider's tip to the ultimate conservation of energy. The assumption, just because it's logical and everyone agrees with it, that the payoff to any effort undertaken today will probably occur tomorrow. To believe that the destination is up ahead is to forever be days behind. Okay, let me give you the cushioned blow. To believe that the destination is up ahead is to be forever days behind, but the ordinary always days behind anyway. So, what believing that the destination is in front of you accomplishes is that it makes being behind acceptable. I won't bother asking you if you get it now, because if you can, you did before I gave the kids' version of it. There are those who still see the teensiest, weensiest little bit of mystery to the mystical struggle, still don't understand the teensiest, weensiest little bit about it. Those far enough along to qualify as knowing anything, at least know that there is certainly no longer any mystery as to what must be done. A conductor said to some distraught-looking people on the platform who believed that they had again missed their train, if the future could be spoken of, events for some would prove that a dreaming of exotic travel is preferable to the dirty work of actually getting there. Many more have been mystics in their mind than ever have been in person. As regards the alleged illusion of existence, it's not that what seems to be going on in life is not actually going on, but that your relationship to it is in need of change. Guilt and remorse are the safety valves of the uncertain. When local mysticism starts becoming too clear, many will then look for it in a foreign language. Far, far away, sang one man, far, far away is where I want to be. But he could have saved his breath, for where can the ordinary be but always far, far away? As per legend, those whom the gods forgot to make deaf will, on their own, make hard their hearing. There was once a curious young boy who thought he had wax in his ears. Turned out to be a mystic. The difficulty, as always, with the ordinary affecting any cure on themselves is the fact that they still haven't a clue as to what the illness is. Ordinary men attempting to be spiritual and mystical is like someone who's ill ordering an operation by mail. And one man said, I begin to suspect that the secret has something to do with pulleys. Even the ordinary speak in metaphors, meaning more than they say. They can't help it. They're human. For his birthday, one mystic poked another mystic in the eye and said that since it was his was coming up next week, how about going ahead and poking him now? And then appeared on the platform from out of the shadows a conductor dressed in a most fanciful uniform who whispered something about trains that make any sense not going anywhere. But because of the shadows and all, it was hard to be sure of his exact words. You don't screw around, I'll read that one again. bluff. I'm not going to. For his birthday, one mystic poked another mystic in the eye and said that since his was coming up next week, how about going ahead and poke him now? Go back and erase that repeat of that one. The issue of function. The body wants children, the mind wants knowledge, and the desires of the few are all tied up in areas not yet clearly defined. While it is predictable that all that lives is driven to produce offspring, what is less understood is the nature of the hunger for individual consciousness, which involves the out-of-sequence attempt to give birth to the future in the midst of today. Among the few, if a man is not his own father, he has no father. In one land, one day the king called together all of the cells and said to them, I am supposed to be in charge here. With which they all nodded their heads in agreement, and he continued, and you are all supposed to follow my lead. And again, their heads nodded concurrence, and he added, so, how come things aren't going better? And one of the cells, trying not to step on the intervening synapse, said to his neighbor, the old fool, he still thinks he's an actual king in a real-life story. And silently to themselves they all shook their heads and said, the old fool, including the crown prince. There was once a world on which, when the young outgrew their childhood, they were forced off the planet, off entirely on their own. And as they left, were given to take with them by their elders a place in their particular genetic connection that had been specifically stepped on. In the early days of this universe were great terrifying upheavals, to which men began to give names in a naive attempt to appease them. Among the titles given were God, Fate, Creation, and strangest of all, the mind. After some time spent pondering the matter, a lad asked his father, is the truth about life so obvious that if it were an animal, it would bite you? And the old man laughed, bite you, hell, it's already swallowed you, my boy. From our continuing periodic dip into the unrecorded, previously unknown annals of mystical history, I am reminded of at least 2 or 3 stories, or until I get tired of remembering them. One is that there was supposedly, some time ago, in a certain, it was an area of this world, an apparent mystical teacher in a certain area of this world, now known, by the way, presently known as a certain area of this world, who, for most of his public career and countervention to the prevailing attitudes of the mystical struggle, maintained the current, at his time, the prevalent approach and idea was that for one to undertake the struggle, one must recluse oneself from life. And in contradiction to that, the prevailing attitude, this one man said not so. That it was not the proper way to go about it, and that one had to do it without secreting oneself from the general flow of ordinary existence. And it further goes on to say that somewhere in his later years, he apparently began to soften his comments in this regard, and that supposedly someone who had been following it for some time came to him and asked why he seemed to be not so adamant now in his injunctions about the need to seclude oneself from the ordinary flow of life. And that the old mystic said, well, there are two possible reasons. One is, I have changed my mind gradually. And the other is I never meant it literally anyway. And it further says that the questionnaire then had to ask himself, in either case, what does this all mean? Only to be joined shortly, just momentarily afterwards, by the old mystic himself, thinking, what does it all mean? Okay, all right, I'll tell you another one then. I just had no idea it was going to have this kind of uproarious impact. There's another story that says one time, a different part of the world, different time, but also a different area of this planet. And for those of you interested in geography, now presently referred to on maps as another part of the planet. Well, I figure it was worth a second shot since the first one seemed to have come out of the quiver, or at least from the bow, as a broken arrow already. Which, as any good mystic would do, I blame upon the potential target. It wasn't my fault. It was adverse wind currents. That and the shoddy state of the target at which I had to aim. And do not take that personally unless you're so inclined. And pick the straw out of your teeth. This other story says that there was once a mystical teacher. And he was one day addressing a small group of people. He was talking to them who were interested in such matters. And he pointed out that the great struggle for individual consciousness, for a consistent state of individual awareness, that he said that the struggle itself for this, for enlightenment, for awakening, was the only human activity that had no potential negative possibilities to it. Far beyond anything physical, but into the non-physical realm, very specifically, is the only activity, it's even the only idea ever known to man, ever conceived of by man, ever spoken of by man, that contains not one slight possible negative aspect. As we all know, what is always by the ordinary considered to be the highest echelons of human thought, theoretical activity, usually looked at as being art or religion. We all know that the history of religion is a history of warfare, not unlike the history between mundane crowns. So anything, philosophical ideas, economic models, any idea known to man has always proven itself to have negative possibilities. That is, it can always result from anyone's view or from any outside observer's view that the purpose is stated, such as religion, civilization itself, but let's say religion, that the purpose is to create a more harmonious relationship between all men. And of course, the first thing, this is not irony, it's history. The first thing that they do is look around and see who doesn't agree and declare war on them. That's simply the nature of it. Somebody is always going to disagree. It always has a negative possibility. And this mystic pointed out that the great mystical struggle itself is the only activity, the only idea known to man that has not the possibility, not the slightest possibility, of a negative aspect. It has no negative aspects, and there is no possibility of it having a negative impact or creating detrimental situations amongst men. According to the story, he said that in the group of people. Yeah, that was interesting. No one ever thought about it that way. And the story says that the mystic himself sort of looked off like he was pondering it further and said, well, even what I just pointed out does not mean, however, that it's going to do ordinary people have any positive effect on them. And they went, the crowd went, Then he looked off some more and he says, by and large, what you would have to say about any possible effect or the reaction to ordinary people to the ideas of a mystical struggle, a struggle to achieve a different state of individual consciousness, about the best you could say, the widest possible description you could give of the effect it has on people in general is none. And supposedly they all went, But then supposedly the mystic himself looked even further off and to himself, he didn't say anything, but to himself thought, this is a new description of the situation of an individual seeker and his own mind, his own thoughts on the matter. Okay. So it was sort of a three-stage observation on this mystic's part. He started pointing out that the whole idea of a transcendental, the achievement of a transcendental, a new state of individual consciousness, is the only activity known to man, the only idea even, you can look at it as idea/activity, but is even the only idea ever conceived of a man that has not the slightest chance of having any negative impact. There's no way to take the idea of being more conscious as opposed to trying to be a Christian, a Jew, a good person, a humanist, any other idea other than the struggle to achieve enlightenment, the awakening of consciousness, the liberation of the mind. Any other idea has, without any problem, you can see it, it has proved itself. It's not a theory that the mystic was offering. It has already been proven. Any other idea that you can think of, that humanity has already thought of, or you wouldn't have been thinking of it anyway, has already been proven to have negative possibilities, that no matter that the aims seem to be of the highest level, it will immediately produce in some a negative reaction. And if carried much further past just the world of ideas, can result in actual physical bloodshed. And the mystic pointed out that of every idea, there is only one that has no such potential, and that is the idea of however it was being expressed at any particular time, the idea of enlightenment, the struggle to achieve an understanding of what life is about, has no possible negative ramifications. There is no way that that idea can spur in anyone else, any sane, ordinary person, any negative reaction. And when he first said it, I'll go back to it one more time, the little group listening, and speaking for them, the sum up of their of them thinking was to realize that that is true. That ordinary people exposed to it, or when just the idea is continued to be spoken of, that there is still public discussion of this idea after all these thousands of years, that it never drifts outside the area where it's being spoken of. It never gets broadcast about in such a way that it creates an adverse reaction. It is simply the only idea. Now, this is not to say that at times it does not appear to, but we're not talking about the reaction coming from people even remotely resembling ordinary. There is never any ordinary, there is never any negative reaction from collective humanity to ideas of being more conscious. So they all went, And after a pregnant, or at least I think I'm a little late pause, I see some people's had to leave town in the past for non-mystical reasons. The mystic, after a pause, pointed out further that just because what he said was unconditionally a statement of reality, he also pointed out that just because I have given a perhaps new view of the singularity of the mystical, the idea of being more conscious, that a new view of the singularity, in this case being that there is no wise, there is no twisting, there is no fashion, there is no possibility of it having negative possibilities amongst the middle of the bell curve of humanity. Just because I pointed that out, he said, let me further point out, for those of you who are nodding, he said to the little group, let me also point out that even though that's a fact, it still does not infer that it has any beneficial or positive effect on those who might happen to hear it. And the interested people went, with a slightly different tone of voice, an alteration in the head of, tilt of the head of, But then, to himself, he carried it to another level. That here it is, ideas, that at least to a few, that ideas, once they hear about it, their whole life changes, or at least they feel like their whole life now, if not makes any sense, if it's not the immediate sensation of that, they at least feel like I have found a place to start searching, a trail to start following, a path to try and walk, that I have no doubt this leads. From everything I now hear or read, I realize that I am not alone. People have done this before, so at least I have some notion of where I am. And so life makes a little sense. So what he was pointing out was, or what he was thinking to himself, this mystic, is here we've got two things. That what I have just pointed out to these people is literally true. That the mystical struggle itself, the quest for the mythical grail, the metaphorical battle to overcome oneself, never amongst ordinary, sane, everyday people, never has, never will, create an adverse, negative reaction. That ordinary people, when they hear this idea, as opposed to any other idea in the world, this idea has no possibility of affecting them negatively. You cannot take an ordinary, sane person on this planet of any culture, religion, nationality, sex, age, if they're sane, by the definition, the local definition, if they're just sane and ordinary, you can, if you describe in just general terms what this is about, there is no way that it will ever strike them as, my God, something should be done about this. These people must be investigated, if not stopped, just on this earth. It just has no such reaction. Them going, oh my God, that's the worst thing I've ever heard of. That goes against everything I believe. That goes against all of our cultural norms. Never. But, the mystic, I'm replaying again, but after waiting a bit, the mystic pointed out, just because I've said that, which I'll go ahead and say what I have heretofore left unsaid, it would be quite reasonable to expect that a group of people, based upon my story thus far, that a group of people that heard that would then, without any prompting, that their mind would immediately at least step over or a bit further than the words of the mystic himself or what he had pointed out, and it would be sort of an unspoken feeling then that, wow, anything that has not even the slightest possibility of doing harm, just almost, it just seems to go without saying, at least has the potential to do some good. That's something that the mystic in my story was making a concise, unconditional statement of fact. That compared to every other idea that can be expressed by man, the idea of expanding one's own awareness of life, one's own understanding, the struggle to find out what life's actually all about, is the one thing that can be described to ordinary people, the one thing, the mystic meant it, really, the one thing, the one idea that can be expressed to ordinary people to which no one can find any negative aspect, it will have no detrimental effect on any ordinary person who hears it. They will not rail against it. They will not go, boy, what a horrible idea. How ungodly, how un-Italian, how un-Jewish, how un-Muslim, how indecent. It just will not happen. The unspoken continuation of that, to which I was attributing to most ordinary minds, should they be following this along, would then, without anything further said, it seems to follow. This means seems to follow. Either that or my brassiere slipping up. That wasn't even included in the course I took, come to think about it. I ad-libbed that one. I hate to brag, but that wasn't in the... I was about to do number, I think it's 17, but I thought, it just struck me. I mean, I hate to brag, but that was ad-lib, folks. That was not part of the course, at any rate. It would be natural that if you ask an ordinary mind, had they followed all this, that if I had then, as an aside, said, well, all right, anything, if indeed that description was valid, that this is the only idea, the struggle to stabilize, to refine, to establish some new sense of consciousness in oneself wherein you might discover, wherein you might be able to understand what's actually going on here. If indeed if the telling of it is correct, that is the one idea, the one description of a possible aim in life, to which no ordinary person can find fault, and on which any ordinary person will not be negatively impacted, then, if I wait a second and I ask an ordinary person, I go, all right, just think, then it's got to have some sort of salubrious, just automatically effect on people. If it's the one thing that has no possible negative aspects to it, then surely, it just follows that it's got to have some positive ones, right? No, it does not. Whereas, if we were talking about anything else in the world, if we left the realm of absolute, where I said that this idea is the only one, or for those of you in Alabama, the onlyest one, and for those of you of more magnanimous turn of mind from Alabama, the most onlyest one. If we left that area of absolutes and went into the realm of the relative, and I just said, forget the mystical idea for a moment of additional individual consciousness. If we just took an idea, if we said the idea, the golden rule, treat your fellow man as yourself, or love your neighbor as yourself, we could say that idea, surely, as part and parcel of it, contains more beneficial possibilities just immediately than, say, an idea that an eye for an eye. That if we're in the relative area, forget the absolute that the mystic was speaking of the idea of struggling for enlightenment being the one idea that has no possible negative aspects, connotations on the psyche, the thinking of man, and we go into the relative, then it could be said otherwise that some ideas have a more concurrent, positive possibility to them than others. Do I sense that was an unusual waste of time even for us? At any rate, it didn't seem to help much, but I'm just going to have to assume that you got part of what I'm saying, that an ordinary person, nothing strange at all, that they would go without saying that if something absolutely has no rough edges to it, then all the edges got to be smooth. If it has no possibility of harmful effects, then it goes without saying that it must, by God, have some potentially beneficial aspects, because everything in life seems to be double-edged. Everything. Any medicine that you take that might, even a medication that might save your young ass, might save you from death, everyone knows, as well as it may work on some specific ill, they all have some side effect. So, you would think that something that had no side effect, the one pristine, the one unconditional, idea in life, that is, the struggle to awaken your own consciousness to a new level, that if it had absolutely no negative possibilities, then it perforce would have some positive possibilities. Which, well, I just had to press on. If an ordinary mind still was following all this, by then they would have given up. Like, well, hell, you're not going anywhere with this, or you're making my head hurt. No, and that's when the mystic, as per this story, pressed on personally to himself and mused that this whole thing is a fresh description, at least to himself he said, of the relationship between the so-called ideas, the mystical ideas throughout history, and an individual man's perception, conception, grappling therewith. Here goes. I will read the mystic's mind. Here was what he was intending, what he was saying to himself. Was that when someone first runs across this, and at first, assuming that someone born to fly, someone born to boogie, and they can't find the music to boogie by, and they find the work of some ancient mystic or somebody, and they read it and they go, there it is. It doesn't have the audio. I don't actually hear it, but right there is the written score of the music for which I've been searching. And he finds that it has no negative aspects. He finds no reason. There's nothing that seems harmful. There's no drawbacks to this. Indeed, for a long time, just the excitement of someone believing, well, I've discovered it. Throughout history, many people are carried along for years. Some people, I'm stretching it to say carried along, people are carried along by the initial enthusiasm, and then many people just reach kind of simultaneously the peak in their hormonal physical years, and they just sort of coast. They coast physically like everyone else running on autopilot, but they can also coast on the form of just automatic recollection, the reliving of the excitement of the days wherein they first discovered what seemed to be traces of this activity. But at any rate, this mystic was thinking to himself, they have discovered that which has no downside. None. And there's no way that they could ever twist it. Never in their life was it ever used in such a way that harmed them. It's just not possible. There's nothing with that information. There's nothing about tomorrow that is detrimental. You cannot have any perception. You cannot have any notion correctly of the future and be able to misuse it or have it misuse you. So the mystic was still reflecting internally. As per all of this, played out inside of one man. That the whole idea that he had just conveyed verbally, that the mystical struggle, the idea, the indescriptions of it, but that is the only idea that offers no potential harm to man. That's one. The second was, but then again, it offers no, to the ordinary sane people, it offers no benefit. And the kind of a third that we're getting to now was, the ordinary, if they're exposed to it or hear it, all their feeling is just indifference. They might listen momentarily and go, okay. No impact is the point. Do you understand? Not just that it has no possibility of a negative one, and then the second, that does not mean it has a possibility of a positive one. We've covered the two visible areas of the four-dimensional world of duality. But he pointed out also to himself, he was reflecting, that the general feeling would be, even if they're exposed to it, is just simply indifference. Not negative, not positive, but a total indifference. And then, it's when he reflected and he quit talking and thought to himself, this is the same description of the journey of many a man, or of all men along this route, is at first he is enthused by it, and very quickly gives himself over to it. I mean, there's no longer any discussion about, well, am I about to harm myself? It's not like all these old tales of people even they're getting involved with black magic or whatever hocus pocus it is, or that maybe I'm fooling around with forces that are so strong, have such a, as all forces do, a good and a bad side, that perhaps I am playing with fire. That's ordinary people who are playing with nothing. Except, as some of you would probably add, except themselves. But a hobby's a hobby. Those born to fly, travel, and boogie, they're not playing with forces potentially dangerous or out of their control. Contraire, God, if many of them would say, once you get past it, God, if only that weren't the case. If that, it's not that I'm dealing with forces that just, always on the verge of running amok and sucking me into it. Those past a certain point will don't holler, suck me into it, suck me into it. But he reflected, and now I'm just going to throw it on you people, since I've about worn it out and we're out of tape. I hadn't worn it out, we're out of tape. At first, it all seems, you got to have the attraction, which the attraction was represented by the mystic talking to these people in the story, that they were there and attracted to it. So that's the beginning. Then he points out sort of the second stage. Your incident, but then you realize, and you realize, not but then you realize this is the one single activity, one single idea known to man. The only idea that his mind can fashion which contains no possible negative aspects, which has no possibility of leading him into areas to his detriment. Okay. Everyone undergoes that internally. I know people do not think about it in this way, but everyone has gone through it if they've reached a certain point. But then the second one is, and the first one oftentimes is reflected, if you're missing it, is the people attempt immediately to bring their friends into the knowledge, to advise their closest intellectual confidants. What I have discovered, will you read this? The kind of crap we've been talking about for years, kind of stuff. I just found something. Will you read this? You'll die. You're going to faint. Sit down. And his best friend, his intellectual soulmate, reads it and goes, that's when you realize it's not going to do anybody any harm. You've already passed that point. But then you realize it's not going to do anybody any good. And kind of a sub-awareness on those lines is understanding how remote each seat on the mystical flight is. I know planes seem like they're all scrunched up and you're shoulder to shoulder, but you start looking and you realize this, by God, is the biggest mother friggin' airplane in the world. I can hardly see the person in the next seat. So then you realize it is not going to do people any good. They're not going to benefit from it. And then the third one, which once you get that good, automatic, or should almost be an automatic certainty on your part or a guess, and what the mystic was going to say was, it's just they're indifferent to it. They can hear it. It is not insane. It will not make them immediately react negatively against it, like you saying, well, I've been talking to the Christian God, or I talked to Satan, or that I talked to the ghost of Abraham, or that I conjure up spirits and work hoodoo charm. Anything you say to that. And I just grab things around you know damn well that half the people you ever mention that to are going to go, you should stop that, or if you're involved, that kind of activity should be stopped. This is the only thing you can describe to any ordinary person. They hear it and they've got nothing negative to say about it. And if you stop and go, well, they think, well, what? You go, what do you think? And they go, well, that's okay. And you go, well, what do you think? And they go, well, hey, I don't care. It sounds fine to me. And you think, well, are you going to, doesn't that make you want to think, maybe press on with it? And they go, well, not exactly. You go, but isn't it great? And they go, well, it's not non-great. But isn't it wonderful? Well, if you like it. But didn't you read that? Didn't you understand what I told you? Well, yeah, I heard what you said. What do you want out of me? I don't care. Go ahead. That is where many people find themselves somewhere along, that they have now become that same attitude, that the information, contraire, when they first heard about it, and for a long time, can go on, as I said, many, many years, decades. It is like the initial enthusiasm, the excitement, them having the knowledge that this is old stuff, or that this journey has been taken by many people, there is nothing strange. That is like the original positive aspect. The enthusiasm that at least I know I'm not crazy, which is really not a good description. That's just one that people use. You realize that you're not going to be an absolute, abject, dark frustration all your life. At least you run across and you know that one person on this planet, whoever wrote this one person, as long gone as he or she may be, this one person, this is just as plain as day. That is not the ramblings of a maniac. That is not dreams. Right there is what I've been trying to get here, and it may just be one or two sentences. And you go, that's it. At least you feel like, okay. That's the initial enthusiasm. That it is, I have now found the positive information. And then somewhere along the line you go through of understanding that other people, you can show it to them, and they will not react negatively, that it has no negative possibilities to it. But also, you show it to the best people, the smartest that you know. And they go, well, yeah, okay. That it has no effect. They're indifferent. Now back to the mystic reflecting, musing upon this occurring within the history, the internal history, the private history of one man's consciousness, that much of the information eventually, and no one ever sits down and decides this, part of it is age, part of it is the weight of the whole universe on you and everyone else, not just you, but everybody. But finally the point that your feelings, and it happens long before you ever have the ability to analyze it, which is the only reason that this old mystic asked me to tell the story tonight, is you find yourself becoming rather indifferent to it. Whereas at one time you knew better. Or whereas at one time you felt better. We got any time? A minute. Well, I got one more story. There was a mystic. There was a certain mystic one day was sitting doing his mystical thing or sitting down somewhere, and his girlfriend came by and bent over behind him and began kissing him along the head. And he thought, where could I be kissed that I needed more? God, those mystics. Or at least I should be more truthful and say, God, those mystics in my stories.